And during this Israeli military operation, you know, what could they do? They were chasing after soldiers with their cameras, trying to tell soldiers, well, we're watching you, in an attempt to maybe get them to behave a little bit better. So I get a phone call in Jerusalem. This man, who identifies himself as, not by name, but just says that he is from Nablus, and he is sitting in his home with his family. Israeli soldiers were going house to house, blowing up doors, raiding the homes, and arresting the men, anyone from age 15 to 50. And he said, my home is going to be next soon. And I don't think your internationals can do anything to help me and my family. But I see them there, outside through the window. And so I just wanted to thank you. And he hung up. And I never knew his name. I never knew how I got my phone number. But that drove home how important this solidarity, this expression of solidarity was. The International Solidarity Movement still works today. It's about 9 years out, you know, and slowly we got the thousands of people. Over 7,000 people from over 30 different countries have come through. And they are standing with Palestinians as they are marching against land confiscation, against settlement expansions, tying themselves to their trees to try to prevent their olive trees from being uprooted, trying to prevent home demolitions, trying to prevent, or at least now to protest the building of the wall that has caged Palestinians and divided them from their land and from each other. In the beginning, the International Solidarity Movement, we were able to send people to Gaza also. So Gaza is physically separated from the West Bank. But our volunteers in Gaza, the most that they could do is express the solidarity with Palestinians living there. The violence of the Israeli military was a lot more intense in terms of active shooting, firing live ammunition into Palestinian neighborhoods on a daily basis, in addition to razing homes to create what they call a buffer zone for the Israeli military for themselves. So razing hundreds of homes. The internationals that would go there would stay with Palestinian families in the most intense areas where Israeli military operations would go on. And they would try to record the gunfire, try to record stories, talk to their media back home, and just try to get the information out about what's happening. Then on March 16, 2003, one of our colleagues, Rachel Corey, 23-year-old American citizen, who came to volunteer with us, she learned that an Israeli bulldozer had come to demolish the home of the family that she had been staying with, a Palestinian pharmacist and his family. So she rushed to the area. She had been gone from the home, but she rushed back. She put on a bright fluorescent vest, because in these areas, you know, we want the soldiers to see us. And she put herself in between the bulldozer and the home. And she was trying to plead with the bulldozer driver, appeal to his humanity, not to demolish this home. And he played cat and mouse with her for about 2 hours. You know, he'd drive up close to the home, get to her, stop, pull back. Drive up to her again, stop, and pull back. Then at one point he decided not to stop, and he ran her over. She was killed almost instantly. 3 weeks later, another one of our volunteers, 21-year-old Tom Herndal, who's a photography student from Manchester in the UK. He was trying to move Palestinian kids out of line of Israeli fire. He noticed 2 small children, frozen with fear, as Israeli bullets were ricocheting off the wall behind them. So he went over to the kids. He picked up one girl, moved her, went back for the young boy, and as he bent down to pick him up, he was sniped in the back of the head. And he lay in coma for 9 months and then he died. Also in the same time period, a British journalist who was making a documentary for the BBC, his name is James Miller, he was shot and killed in Gaza by the Israeli military. So now all within a relatively small, short period of time, internationals were being mortally wounded or killed. Israel was getting bad press for it. Never mind thousands of Palestinians that have been injured and killed, but these internationals, they had names, they had faces, they had various countries and governments behind them where they came from. So what did Israel decide to do? Can't go to Gaza anymore. You know, before we would send our volunteers and you'd think that you were going to a different country, not that you're still in Palestine or occupied territories, because they have this massive thing that they call the Erez checkpoint. It's this massive installation. But you'd go, you'd show your passport, you get checked, you get stamped, and you go into Gaza until whatever time you wanted to come out. After spring of 2003, you can't do that anymore. Now if you want to go into Gaza, you need special permission. You have to apply to the Southern Command of the Israeli military at least 5 days ahead of time. You have to fill out this application, and you have to have what Israel would consider a valid reason for wanting to go. And this reason, what was valid, fell into two categories. One, either you were a journalist working for an agency that Israel recognized or registered with their foreign press office, and they had to let you in. Two, you were working for an international agency, organization that Israel recognized. The UN, International Committee of the Red Cross, a host of other organizations. But if you want to go visit friends, if you wanted to go visit family, go to the International Solidarity Movement, if you were with us, can't go in anymore. Now mind you, Palestinians always have difficulty getting out, but people could get in. Not after the spring of 2003, it became a lot more difficult. So we were cut off as the International Solidarity Movement, we were cut off from Gaza for a number of years. In 2005, skipping ahead a little bit, Israel declared that it was unilaterally disengaging from Gaza. They're pulling out their military, they're pulling out their settlers. They had 8,000 to 9,000 settlers living in colonies in Gaza. They're pulling them out. They call this a unilateral disengagement, and they try to tell the world, well, we ended the occupation of Gaza. Well, the measure of whether or not the territory is occupied under international law, it's not boots that you have on the ground, it's not how many soldiers you have in a territory. It's by something called effective control. How much effective control does the state party have over a territory? So let's look at Gaza. You have this small area of land, 25 miles long, 4 to 7 miles wide. Sorry, I'm speaking miles instead of kilometers. Israel pulled their settlers and soldiers out, but they still control all the entrances and exits into Gaza. All of the land borders directly controlled by Israel, except for one, Rafah, which is the border with Egypt, that's indirectly controlled by Israel by way of their security arrangement with Egypt. So if Egypt was going to open the border, they wouldn't do it without coordinating with Israel. So all the land borders are controlled by Israel. Airspace, controlled by Israel. Access to the sea, controlled by Israel. The population registry, controlled by Israel. So a child born in Gaza doesn't count unless Israel gives them a national identification number. If you want a passport, can't get one unless Israel approves the issuing it. Israel would have to give you an ID number and approve the Palestinian Authority issuing you a passport. If you wanted to travel, you have to get permission from Israel. If Palestinians in Gaza want to import anything, it has to go through Israel. If they want to export anything that they might produce, Gaza has some of the most beautiful carnations and tastiest strawberries you've ever tasted, or I've ever tasted. Hopefully you'll taste them one day too. Can't unless it goes through Israel. So very much what Palestinians in Gaza have for dinner on any single day, determined by what Israel has allowed into Gaza on that day. That's not to even mention the fact that the Israeli military can carry out an operation inside Gaza whenever it wants to, and it frequently does. Breaking the sound barrier, flying their planes over Gaza, striking targets, whatever they consider a target in Gaza, invading anytime they want. They also have their soldiers on the border between Gaza and Israel, and they've created what they call a buffer zone in Gaza territory. They say they identify it formally as 300 meters into Gaza territory, but really in reality how they enforce it, it's at least a kilometer, that they call the no-go zone. So you can't go there. And it just so happens that 1/3 of Gaza's agricultural land falls in this no-go zone. So if Palestinian farmers want to go harvest their crops so they can feed their families, they risk being shot at by Israeli soldiers. And indeed, over the last 3 or 4 years, 32 Palestinian farmers have been shot dead for going to try to harvest their parsley or other crops so they can feed their families. The sea, fishermen. Gaza has a long port. 3,500 families in Gaza depend on the fishing industry. But if fishermen want to fish, if they go more than 3 miles out, they get shot at by the Israeli Navy. So what does that mean? 3,500 fishermen fishing only up to 3 miles out from the Gaza coast. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is Israel has not allowed the people of Gaza to import the materials that they need in order to fix their sewage system or to purify their water. And so now the World Health Organization approximates that only about 5, maximum 10% of the water in Gaza is even relatively potable or drinkable or meets the minimum health standard. 80 million liters of untreated sewage is dumped into the Mediterranean every single day so that these fishermen are fishing in polluted water. And international agencies have reported that there is potential for outbreak of waterborne diseases in Gaza because of this policy of not letting people import what they need. So Gaza is very much controlled by Israel. It's very much occupied. In 2006, Palestinians had their national elections, free, fair, democratic elections by international monitors, by their standards, and they elected Hamas into power. But Israel considers Hamas a terrorist organization. The United States considers Hamas a terrorist organization. So this was used as an excuse to further punish the Palestinian people, to cut off aid, to cut off the transfer of Israel collects taxes and customs of things coming into Palestinian territories, and they're supposed to turn that over to the Palestinians. They stopped turning it over to the Palestinians. International agencies, some governments cut off aid to the Palestinian Authority, and the situation got pretty bad. But eventually, the international community resumed cooperating with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, but they left Gaza isolated. Especially in 2007, after Hamas took over power from Fatah, which was basically the Palestinian Fatah and Hamas, the two biggest parties, had come to an agreement about how they would govern jointly, kind of a unified government. But they ended up in June 2007, they took over power in Gaza from Fatah. And now they control, Hamas controls Gaza. Well, Israel used that as an excuse to completely seal Gaza. Now, even what goes into Gaza is severely restricted. Not only in quantity, but also in the kinds of items that can go in. The UN used to bring hundreds of trucks into Gaza per day because about 70% of the population of Gaza are refugees. Refugees from when Israel was created in 1948, and refugees from 1967 when the West Bank and Gaza were occupied. And so the UN Relief Works Agency administers these various refugee camps and tends to the needs of the refugee population in Gaza. So they used to bring in hundreds of trucks of aid, of supplies every single day. Now drastically reduced. Thousands of items that we take for granted on a daily basis can't go into Gaza anymore. Lots of food items, just off the top of my head. Pasta, vinegar, cardamom, tea, sage, coffee, chocolates, lots of other things. Not allowed into Gaza because Palestinians don't need these. These are luxury items. School supplies, papers, books, pencils, not allowed. In fact, the UN once, when I took a delegation into Gaza, they said, we don't have books for our schools. And we can't print books in Gaza, even though we have the ability to print here, because we don't have paper, and we're not allowed to bring in paper. Toys for kids, not allowed. And even more serious things like certain